This episode brought to you by
GTM AI Academy. Learn AI from a globally trusted resource. Coach K, Jonathan Carfort. Their bundle, Enablement AI Mastery, includes both the core Generative AI Foundations course and Enablement AI Mastery specifically. Each course has a value of $599 individually, but Coach K is offering them as a bundle with reduced pricing. And as a listener of the Inside Sales Enablement podcast, if you act now, you can use code ISE30 to get an additional 30% off of the entire thing. You will also receive free access to the GTM AI Tools demo library. Coach K has done the demos, so you don't have to, and offers his straight shooting opinion, fact-based through an enablement lens. Go to www.gtmaiacademy.com and enter code ISE30 today and elevate your AI enablement game.
Welcome to the Inside Sales Enablement podcast. Where has the profession been? Where is it now? And where is it heading? What does it mean to you, your company, other functions, the market? Find out here. Join the founding father of the sales enablement profession, Scott Santucci, and Trailblazer Brian Lambert as they take you behind the scenes of the birth of an industry. The Inside Sales Enablement podcast starts now.
I'm Scott Santucci.
I'm Brian Lambert, and we are the Sales Enablement Insiders. Our podcast is for sales enablement leaders looking to elevate their function, expand their sphere of influence, and increase the span of control within their companies.
Together, Brian and I have worked on over 100 different kinds of sales enablement initiatives as analysts, consultants, or practitioners. We've learned the hard way what works and what doesn't.
On this podcast, we use a conversational format to help share the experiences that only people who've been there and done that can provide, as we've been pushing the envelope in the profession for over a decade. And today, on this show, we're going to discuss, if you want to be clear what sales enablement is, stop trying to ask what the definition is and focus on the problem that you're trying to solve for your company. Scott, you usually start us out with a centering story. What do you have for us?
So, Brian, this one is just for you. For those of our listeners earlier, we did a Chicken Hawk episode where we actually used some multimedia, and I've got a movie clip. Another movie clip. You've been asking for it. Maybe the rest of Insider Nation has been asking for it. Here it goes. Tell me the movie, tell me the scene, and tell me why it's relevant. Okay, Brian?
I'll try.
Right. You have no idea what it is, right?
Right.
I guarantee you, here's my bet. I guarantee you, you're going to love this clip.
Okay.
Guarantee it. Ready?
All right.
We're trying to solve a problem here, but not like this. You're not even looking at the problem. Very aware of the problem. I mean, okay, good. What's the problem? Look, Billy, we all understand what the problem is. We have to replace. Good. What's the problem? The problem is we have to replace 3 key players in our lineup. What's the problem?
Same as it's ever been. We've got to replace these guys with what we have existing.
No, what's the problem, Barry?
We need 38 home runs, 120 RBIs, and 47 doubles to replace.
The problem we're trying to solve is that there are rich teams and there are poor teams. Then there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. It's an unfair game. And now we've been gutted. Organ donors for the rich. Boston's taking our kidneys. Yankees taking our heart. And you guys are sitting around talking the same old good body nonsense like we're selling jeans. Like we're looking for Fabio. Think differently. We are the last dog at the bowl. You see what happens to the runt of the litter? He dies.
Really, that's a very touching story and everything, but I think we're all very much aware of what we're facing here. You have a lot of experience and wisdom in this room. Now, you need to have a little bit of faith and let us do the job of replacing Giambi.
Is there another first baseman like Giambi? No, not really.
No.
And if there was, could we afford him?
No.
Then what the are you talking about, man? If we try to play like the Yankees in here, we will lose to the Yankees out there.
Well, that sounds like fortune cookie wisdom to me, Billy.
No, that's just logic.
Who's Fabio?
The shortstop. The shortstop.
Who's
right.
Fabio?
So what's the quote, Mr. Lambert?
What's the problem? What's the effing problem? And that's Moneyball, the scout scene. I love that scene.
I told you. I know my podcast partner. So why do you think that this is relevant to our topic today about making sure that if you want clarity about sales enablement and your department and your function, you got to first focus on what problem you're solving. Why do you think it's relevant?
Much like the Oakland A's baseball team in that scene, the world has changed, and applying legacy approaches, using gut feel, and applying what's worked in the past isn't going to work anymore today.
I love it. So you're going to take over my job here as the setup guy.
That's what's perfect. In it for me.
What
the heck are you talking about?
Right. What are you talking about? So what does this have to do with anything and everybody else? And you're exactly right. Every business that we're in, we have to face the reality, and the reality is that we're in a digital economy. And in a digital economy, every single one of our companies has a new business strategy that we're rolling out, which requires massive coordination between product, marketing, and sales. And the way that I like to think about this is the people who are going to win in this new economy, in this new digital economy, they're the ones who are the digitellers. The losers are going to be the ones who are told. Who's a digiteller? Netflix is a digiteller. They have had a vision about how people are going to use mobile and streaming media, and were able to convey that message to their customers. And they told Blockbuster, and Blockbuster wasn't able to catch up or compete. And they went out of business. Lots of people are doing the digitelling. More people are being the digitold. We want our listeners to be the digitellers, not the digitold. And that's really what we're here about, is that we think that sales enablement can be a critical role to help companies do that, but to manage that process. However, you got to make sure you're focusing on the right problem. Yeah. So that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah, I love it. And, if we're going to be digitold, we're sitting around the scout room table, and we know these things to be true, Scott, that all salespeople are short attention span and coin operated. So right. We know what problem to solve. We need to give them more bite-sized chunks faster and flood them with as much information as possible, as fast as possible, so they'll be successful. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, Brian, if that's your mindset, then you are on the digitold heap. That's just really what it comes down to. So let's break this down and what's driving this. So what's driving this is an observation that Brian made back at the Sales Enablement Summit. So Brian did this really cool exercise with the audience, and I want to make sure we don't lose it. So Brian, the exercise that I'm referring to was the one where basically you got the insight between individual contributors, department leaders, or transformative. Could you walk us through what that exercise was and what you were trying to accomplish with it?
Right. Yeah. So during my talk, I said, based on the discussions you just had, we had 2-minute discussions with partners there in the audience. How many of you are building things out? How many of you are running programs? And how many of you are leading a strategic function? 65% or so were individual contributors building out as kind of solopreneurs, if you will. About 30% were running a department or a program like new hire training. So they were the new hire training team, or they were the playbook team. And they had a program, and that's how their department was defined, was, those are the folks that have, the portal, the platform, or the playbook, et cetera. And about 5% were leading a strategic function. And that's the rundown. How does that jive, Scott, with who you've been talking to, by the way?
Well, so that jives. I have a slightly different lens, but it definitely fits yours. I think I think there's a lot of room in the middle, in that middle definition. But what I have seen from my experience in the Sales Enablement Society and participation at the conference board, I basically see that the overwhelming majority of current sales enablement practitioners are sole individual contributors, no doubt. And most of those are new to that role. However, what's interesting and what prompted this segmentation discussion was there has been a lot of people talking about different definitions. So as we did in our last podcast, episode number 20, we talked about our position, what was the rationale behind the definition of sales enablement that I published and Brian peer reviewed and other people contributed to. Why we wrote that lengthy of a definition and what was it for? And it's really, the purpose was to provide a platform for a role. And what's been interesting is we're hearing a lot, maybe it's because we're doing a podcast and we're targeting more of a strategic view of sales enablement. I don't know what the reason is, but both Brian and I are getting a lot of people talking to us about how valuable that old definition was. And we think it's kind of interesting that the Forrester had the first definition of it, and they have since published another new definition, and now they also have the serious decisions definition of what sales enablement is. So we have lots and lots of definitions. What we're here is to not really debate the definitions. We're here to help provide you clarity. So we want to talk about what those problems are. But the connecting point, and I want to see if you see this too, Brian, the connecting point was the people who resonate very positively with the definition that we published all fit either into the transformative or department level category.
Yeah.
And the people who are in the individual contributor role do not like it a lot. So is that jive with your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard everything from that definition's too long, and you can't achieve the definition that you're talking about where it's a strategic ongoing function until those executives invest more. And
those executives.
Yeah. And I think interesting, I'm cracking open my email because today, about 4 hours ago, it says, hey, Brian, this is an email from somebody that's listened to the podcast that just dropped yesterday. So less than 24 hours later, hey, Brian, I listened to the podcast on the Securities Act and the Foundation to Elevate the Profession. And it really got me thinking about my approach to sales enablement and where I currently am now and how I should tackle sales enablement if I get a new role. So she's thinking about a new role and she's actually interviewing. And I really want to talk to you things. I want a fresh start. And given that there's a merger and a reinvention in my current company to be successful, it may be too late to do that here, but I would love your thoughts on if I move. So in other words, I believe, if I read between the lines, that podcast kind of struck a chord with, the ship is set sail a little bit where she's currently at, but boy, wouldn't it be cool to apply that in her future organization. I didn't share that with you before, Scott, but I think that's relevant to the conversation. You have two ways to approach it. Oh, that definition that Brian and Scott are talking about, it's too long. Or, holy crap, I can really think about it as a strategic execution function that executes the business strategy, and I can set it up that way if I lead.
So first of all, number one, I really appreciate that because you threw me a surprise. So one of the things that we're trying to do in the podcast, I'm going to get you the next one that we record. But we try to throw each other some things that we're not anticipating. So that was fantastic. And I think you're right. I think that the purpose of what we want to get into right now is let's be realistic here. No matter what definition you use, first of all, there isn't consensus within the market that there's a common definition. You agree with that, Brian?
I agree. Yes.
So if there is no common definition, using other people's definitions as the be with all, end with all is a fool's errand. That's just come to that point right now. Okay, so then what does that mean? What it means is that you, as a sales enablement professional, have to own what the definition is inside your company.
Yeah.
So let's talk about strategies that way.
Yeah, I like it. So in other words, let's stop worrying about the 14 definitions or however many there are. I don't even know. I just made that up. And let whatever one you pick, the importance of that and the language you use and how you approach your role and your function, and then how that might, show that might enact inside your own organization. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
and I think I got some stories I can tell there too.
That's great. So let's give people a framework to follow first, right? So the first point is, no matter what definition you have, and no matter what, even if it's published, desk of God, people are still going to disagree with it because you put the word sales and enablement together, and very few people are going to agree. So the issue there is, pick a definition that you like that matches to your vision, but then you have to socialize it. And the first thing that you have to be able to socialize shouldn't be, hey, here's the role. You should make sure you socialize, hey, do we agree on a problem?
Yeah.
And the reason that that's so important is that most sales enablement roles start as VPs of broken things. You inherit a mess. And in order to articulate those things, not everybody, there are so many different little messes around that exist all over the organization. You'd probably want to be able to organize a bunch of them. So depending on how you frame the business problem that you're trying to solve is going to attract the altitude level, that people pay attention to it. It's going to determine who your executive sponsor is. It's going to determine what budget you're going to get. It's going to determine how much teeth you can ask for in compliance. And it's going to set the tone of whether you were viewed as a strategic function or a tactical one. So in order to do that, we're going to concentrate on that first step, which is a problem. And everybody can say, oh, here's a problem. But inside a company, there's a big difference between what you see as a problem, what other people see as a problem, and also, are you really treating a symptom of a much larger problem? So we're going to talk through problem solving.
Yeah, I like that a lot because much like a ship that leaves the port and sets sail, if it's 1 or 2 degrees off from that initial launch, you could miss a whole country, right? And I think that's what's come into my mind, Scott, is depending on how you think about your role or define it and come out of the gate with it, and how you think about framing it out could determine where you end up. And that's logical, right? So if you ended up somewhere you didn't intend, or perhaps didn't end up where you wanted to be, it might be because you started off with the wrong trajectory.
Yes.
Which is the importance of a definition from the concept of what problem you're going to solve.
And also what's our North Star?
Yeah.
Or how do we set our bearings? So here's a scenario. I'm going to give a scenario to start off with that I hear from a lot of our listeners. So a lot of our listeners who go and are looking for jobs tell me that, number one, first, the job descriptions that they run into are all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is that when they go and interview for those jobs, often I'm told, well, they don't know what sales enablement is.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your take on those observations? So first take, is that a common situation? And then
it's funny because I'm laughing because that's exactly where I wanted to go, was job descriptions and how people are hiring. So I think we're having a mind meld or something. That's why I'm laughing. But yeah, totally. And actually I reviewed about 50 of them. I found about 10 of them were copy and pasted across 4 different industries. So that's interesting to think about is, hey, I like this definition sounds cool. So let me copy and paste it. And there you go. That's who we're hiring for. So I totally agree. And one of the things that popped into my mind is, in that interview process, that might be a good time to actually educate folks and have this definitional conversation.
Well, so
why?
yeah. So I
why
think
are you hiring in this role?
there's two parts, right? Let's start first with the job description itself. So for our listeners, if you're looking at a job description, we tend to think of these things as ironclad, but let me give you more insight about where they come from. Job descriptions also need a body of evidence and a foundation to work from. If we accept that there's no common definition of sales enablement, then these job descriptions are either being written by consultants or by human resource analysts who are interviewing sales leaders or whomever is paying for the role.
Or doing market research.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? So let me give you an example. An example of that is when I was still running the Sales Enablement Society, this topic kept coming up. So I said, hey, let's take one of these job descriptions. Let's call the company. Why would we call the company? Well, let's call the company and see if we can figure out what the origin of this job is. Why would we do that? I don't know. Why wouldn't we do it? Let's just figure it out. So called them up, got the head of human resources. They were excited. They thought going to be able to recruit it. I said, well, where's the origin of this role? Because they had a lot of language in the job description, Brian, about Six Sigma Lean, expertise. And, they were curious how come they weren't getting a lot of applicants.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, where did you get the Six Sigma Lean in here from? Because it was underneath the banner, right? It was an example, like a detailed bullet underneath the example of operational efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, I got that from interviewing the head of sales, the VP of sales. Oh, okay. Do you mind if I talk to him? Why would you do that? I don't know. I'm just curious about, did he use Six Sigma here as a hard actual requirement? Or was he using it as a representative example? And the human resource person was, I don't know. That's why I want to ask. So I asked the head of sales, and he said, I don't know. I just put a whole bunch of keywords in here of things that I think I need, but I'm really looking for somebody that can solve these problems for me. And I said, well, let's talk about what these problems are. Maybe we can recraft what this job description looks like. And it's very easy if we just start asking some why questions. So that's a common scenario, is what is the source of these job descriptions?
Yeah. Yeah. I like it. And there's that aspect, and then there's the aspect of, the expectation, right? So what did you find when you asked why? What were some of the things that he said he was looking for? Do you remember?
Well, I do. So really what it was he was delighted that I was asking why to begin with.
Yeah.
Delighted. And he said, more or less, I know something's wrong with our overall performance, but can't really pinpoint it. So he was using a lot of specificity just to see if he could attract conversations. So I said, what do you know about the Sigma Lean? He said, well, I've heard about it, but I heard it was it's a process for operational efficiency, and I definitely want to have better productivity. I said, I got it. So basically you're looking for somebody who's going to look at the numbers and also to be analytical and also practical. It's like, yes, exactly. So, well, if you put a spec in here about Six Sigma Lean, you're going to get people with uber degree of precision. Oh, I don't want that. Well, you're using this as a representative example. You can see how people would misinterpret that.
Right.
Yeah. So this role becomes too difficult without any framing. So it's like, why don't I just hire some trainers then? I said, well, don't do that.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. And I know somebody who's gone through 5 or 6 interviews, and the same thing played out. And early interview screeners, right? If you look at the interview process, they don't like that question. Oh, why do you want to ask me that? I'm trying to figure out if you're qualified to do what the bullets say. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting discussion. And I think for our listeners, it's important to plant those seeds. But, you may have to go through the hoops to get to the hiring manager, but have that discussion at the hiring manager, because it's going to go back to, what's the expectation? Is the expectation that you're an individual contributor? Is the expectation that you're going to take over one of the programs and run it, or the services and run it? Or are you going to be building out and part with him or her on the strategic functional aspect of, the go to market? Right. And those are important distinctions that may not show up in the job description that would in a conversation.
So let's shift now to the people that are in the roles today. So one of the key buzzwords that both Brian and I are seeing everywhere is sales onboarding. Onboard. Brian, what's the problem for onboarding?
Well, what problem are we trying to solve with onboarding?
Well, yeah, there's just a lot of stuff about onboarding. I'm asking it purposely open-ended.
Well, now I want to ask you questions to zero in on it. Maybe that's the point of asking it like that, instead of jumping to, well, here's my plan, and here's how I would do it, and here's how I would show up. And it's really important to have facilitators that have these certain skills.
Yes.
Head down that path. That probably wouldn't be very prudent in an ambiguous role in a shifting economy, in a shifting business strategy view of your digital versus digital, jumping down a path where everybody might actually agree, but as far as a knee-jerk reaction, they wouldn't fight it, but might not be what they really want.
Yeah. So the reason I pick on onboarding is I want to tell you a conversation that I had with actually 3 operating partners at private equity firms. And all of them have talked to me about best practices in sales enablement and how do you do onboarding better? And I said, well, what is the business problem you're looking to solve? Let's start there. Well, we need to see a faster time to value. What do you mean by time to value? Well, what we mean is that there are investments that are made in the sales force, and we want them producing more quickly. What does production look like? Well, that's a good question. We don't really have a standard definition of what production looks like. We expect our portfolio companies, the heads of sales, et cetera, to know that. Okay, so basically what I gather is what you want is to accelerate or collapse the time it takes to be productive, whether it be a new hire or whether it be to the change of a rep as you're rolling out a new sales training program, or you're trying to roll out a cross-selling initiative. Yes, absolutely. How do you find your portfolio companies responding to that? It's really challenging. We are resisting the urge, and actually we find that we need to be a lot more prescriptive about exactly what we want. So we define representative examples like onboarding for new hires, and here's a kit of what it should look like. So you're saying that kit, you don't want to implement it exactly. You're saying this is what's in our mind's eye about what we think should be included, but that you're open for somebody who has expertise to make it better. Absolutely, you're right. Gotcha. How is it executed in your portfolio companies? Oh, they just execute to the letter, and it's very frustrating for us because they lose focus on what the real goal is, which is time to value. So here's an example of, in a conversation about figuring out what the real problem is. The problem is not, we need to roll out a training program by Thursday. The real problem is, how do we make investments so that we accelerate the time to value from all of our reps to actually being performers? So there's a big difference between the scope of what those things look at and what the project looks like. And it might sound like semantics, but in terms of context, it's completely different.
I think that's why we like that games, go talk to folks, at the conferences, at the Sales Enablement Society meetings, even your peers, say, I'm in sales enablement, what do we mean by sales here? And what do we mean by enablement? That can get to what the expectation is and what people think you should be doing. But it also gives you an opportunity to perhaps reframe, which is important. And just to recap, the world of work is changing. It's a convoluted space. It's ambiguous, and there's opportunity in that. Folks are trying to make sense of the world around them, from recruiting to even portfolio private equity funds and companies, and they're giving it a shot. You can either take that as a mandate, a directive, or you can have a conversation to make sure that you're on the same page and that you have the same vision and alignment, and asking questions around what problem are we trying to solve, and where did this role come from, and what do you mean by onboarding, these should not be lightning rods to get you fired. And then nobody's going to die if you ask those questions. And I think many of our listeners may be a little bit afraid to ask those because it's just a given that everybody knows what those answers are. But, Scott and I are here to tell you that it's not a given, and it's because of the times that we're in. There's multiple definitions of the same word. For example, value or platform or cloud or customer. So have those conversations. Is that a good recap, Scott, of where we're at here in the podcast?
Yeah, I think that's a great recap. And I would say that, to add to what your point was, if there is not consensus around a definition of sales enablement, it's your job to create that clarity. The way that you create that clarity is to help people agree on what the problems are and to prioritize them. You should have ideas. You should not be the one that says, these are the problems and here's how you prioritize them. You should let your executive sponsors do that. That way, you get buy-in and the permission to be able to tackle those things. So to be really, really clear on this, step number one is pick a problem. Step number two is really challenge yourself. The problem that you are addressing, is it really in fact a problem? Is it a problem that you see? Or is in fact it really just a symptom of a bigger problem? How do you find that out? Then the second thing too is once you get clarity, you can have a clear conversation around what that problem is. Find out who agrees that it's a problem. Because if you don't have consensus that is the problem that you are addressing and therefore what your role exists to do, you're going to have a mighty difficult time managing tons of people's expectations, and you're going to go running back to air cover for your boss to protect you all the time, and that's going to get unbelievably exhausting both for you and your boss.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, so I love those steps, and I want to breathe some life into this. Can I toss a scenario your way?
Of course.
A situation. Let's say that there's a new sales enablement leader who's been enrolled for 120 days, and their sales leader comes to him and says, listen, the QBRs are coming up. We need to make sure that those are flawlessly executed. Is everybody lined up? And is everybody ready? And you need to make sure that we have a full agenda, and we need to make sure we document what everybody's action items are.
So
what's the definition of sales enablement there?
Well, what I would say is that what's happened is that particular individual hasn't defined the scope of the role. And basically what happened is probably the head of sales went to the sales operations person. Sales operations person said, I'm too busy doing X, Y, and Z. Well, guess what? You've gotten spillover administrative duties. So that individual, the business problem that they've got is that they are, frankly, they're extra capacity to be able to handle overload administrative duties that this head of sales ops couldn't get to.
Yeah, and that's a real scenario, by the way.
It's common. This is why
the title is sales enablement.
Right, sales enablement heads of broken things. You have that title. Why do you get your inbox filled up? One, most sales enablement leaders tend to be very eager. Okay, I'll help. And two, the other challenge is that as they do that, they don't have any scope. So I, as the head of sales, don't know that I'm cutting into other plans or other thoughts that you're working on or whatever master strategy, because you haven't given me a vision of what you're building to. So I'm going to say, I guess that you are my resource to unclog things. And I want to make sure that I unclog these things with the QBRs. And if I have some discipline about how we do it, then I'm going to have a good inventory of records, and I'm going to be able to problem solve that way. I don't think of you, Brian, as the de facto person, as somebody to help problem solve with me. You've just reconfirmed for me that you are my administrative assistant. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to treat you that way.
Yeah. Well, here's another situation.
Okay.
Purposely on the, well, I'll let you judge. So I was going to say on the other end of the spectrum, but that leads the witness a little bit, which is what I just did.
Thank you. The witness is led.
Well, so, hey, we're changing our go-to-market. We're evolving our platform. We bought 3 companies. We're stuck on messaging. Our board wants to know what the plan is.
Well, what I do is those are all a collection of symptoms. We need to first organize those into a common problem. So what are these events? I guess what I would do is I call them complexity factors. We have multiple complexity factors. One is the business is changing its business strategy, so we have to change our go-to-market. 2 is we're moving from an old model into a platform, selling a platform, which also is hard. We're also integrating 3 different companies. The reaction would be, well, shouldn't we break those down into different initiatives? But unfortunately, in order to execute a platform sale, we have to communicate to customers holistically. So therefore, somebody must be responsible for it. And in the organization today, if you would do an organizational RACI analysis, this touches every function. It touches product, it touches finance, it definitely touches sales, it touches marketing, and it touches human resources. But no one group owns it. It's a pure cross-functional problem. So therefore, because no one owns it, because this is a problem with many tentacles, and we must simplify it, the business problem that sales enablement must address is exactly that. We must simplify the complexity so that we make it easier for our customers to buy and our sellers to sell. That's
Great.
The business problem.
I like it. So there's 2 examples. So let me close this out a little bit here. I'm going to just briefly recap, and then Scott, if you have any final words, and then you can take us out. But let me recap what I think we did on this call, right? So first, what we did was we talked about creating a definition that aligns to your vision and your overall remit, and also enrolling leadership in that and having those conversations, those why conversations, to ensure that you can have an influential voice in how you're perceived and how you're, quite frankly, resourced, for example. So there's implications to that. 2, this idea of making sure that you understand the difference between reacting to symptoms versus problems, and thinking more deeply about perhaps root causes that might be tackled in an ongoing way, for example, versus just reacting to a symptom. 3, borrowing from our stakeholder management push that we've had on the podcast, I believe we've also highlighted here that the need for top-down alignment and the need to communicate. I mean, we haven't talked about it specifically, but to do something like this, where it's saying make sure you have alignment, make sure you enroll others, there's a huge stakeholder management implication to making sure that others agree with your definition. So don't create it in your own head. Don't create it on your own computer. Others must also agree with it, I would say. What do you think about those 3 key actions for those listening?
I think they're spot on. I think any practitioner who doesn't want to be an individual contributor and wants to get out of the mailbox must listen to all of the episodes that we had around stakeholder management. This is both simple and complex at the same time. You need to do your work and get prepared for it.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Scott. And thanks so much for those of you chiming in. To have the real time feedback on these episodes is great. So keep that coming. As you can hear, we're using that on these podcasts. So, this is about you as part of the Insider Nation and your success more than it is about what Scott and I think. Obviously, our point of view comes from years of experience, but obviously part of that experience comes from engaging with folks like you. So through these conversations, we really appreciate that. Keep us on our toes, challenge us, and obviously put out the word to others to have them listen to the podcast. And let's get our community bigger. If you're at the Sales Enablement Society meeting in a couple of weeks, we'll see you there. And we're actually going to be podcasting right on the spot. So perhaps you can make it on our show too. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us. To become an insider and amplify your journey, make sure you've subscribed to our show. If you have an idea for what Scott and Brian can cover in a future podcast or have a story to share, please email them at engage@insidese.com. You can also connect with them online by going to insidese.com, following them on Twitter, or sending them a LinkedIn request.